Guys, no power meter, no problem. So I just want to make a quick video on how you use your Garmin Edge to get the most out of your cycling when you don't have a power meter and you want to use HR as a different metric. Ultimately, there is no substitution for having a power meter on your bike, but it is quite expensive. But what you can do is take the information you have, use your Garmin, get a heart rate monitor, and it's a bit more of an economical way, or slightly less cost effective, or slightly more cost effective way to cycle outdoors and get the most from your cycling. First thing we're going to do is set up your Garmin. I have the Garmin Edge 1040. I like the size of it. It's a bit bigger than some other units, but it means that I get to see everything that's on the screen, especially when it comes to things like direction and also my HR data. Hit the menu bar on the main page and then go to Activity Profiles, and we're going to choose our road profile. Select that and then Data Screens. We're going to change screen 1, which has got our main data on. There are 7 fields and I have option B. Click OK so we can change it. We're going to change the main screen, that big one, to heart rate. So we double tap on it and we scroll down. So we don't go to heart rate, we go to graphical, and from graphical we go all the way down to heart rate graph. And this is the data screen that we want, that will give us the most heart rate information. Secondly, the reason we're going to use this particular screen when we start talking about HR is that it's an HR graph, and that means that we can see a little bit of the past data relative to our heart rate. Once we know our threshold heart rate, we can then see when we are above it and for how long we've been above it, and then we know how much time we have to spend underneath our threshold HR. Last thing we're going to do is we need to get the data, so you have to do an FTP test. Once you've done your FTP, you've got your Swift data and your Strava data, and then you can actually work out what your heart rate is relative to what your FTP is. Then we can use that as a really good guide for your LT2. Probably the easiest thing to do is that if you have screen recorded your FTP test, you can see that mine here, I've got 175 FTP. So I go to the section of the test where I'm riding around that, so 180 watts. Then I look at my heart rate based on that point in time. That's going to be the easiest and most simple way to determine what your heart rate is around your FTP. But the second option is a little bit different, and one I imagine most of you will have to do. It's important to note that your heart rate will not spike when you are doing your FTP test, because it is a slow ramp increase. It's not like you're diving into a sprint, and if you are doing a 20-minute test, chances are that your heart rate will settle at a certain point and maybe bounce around a little bit or grow steadily. So go to your data file in Strava or on Swift and then roughly find a guide for the point at your FTP wattage. I've switched mine to a time-based data, and then I can actually correlate that to the 14 minutes 20 where I was doing efforts at 280 watts when my FTP is about 275, and you can see that my heart rate is about 150 on the screen. Bear in mind guys, it's not 100% accurate, but mind you, FTP tests, there's always a little kind of wavering in the results anyway. With heart rate though, what I would recommend is the more that you ride, the more you need to pay attention to it, because you get fitter or you get slightly less fit if you're not riding, so it will slightly move over the course of a few weeks maybe. So the best thing you can do is pay attention to your heart rate and just kind of see roughly based on, let's call it the art of science, where it is and then just kind of how that feels. The reason we use this particular graph on the Garmin is because it shows our historical data, and we can see that if we spent a lot of time riding over our threshold, then we need to do a bit more time riding under our threshold to recover. Think of it as a scale. The more time you spend over, the more time you have to spend under. And that's what we worry about when it comes to L2 clearance. So that's my little hack for cycling outdoors without a power meter when you want to get the most out of it. Having a bike computer is an extremely handy and useful way to do it without having to actually pay for a power meter, because they can be quite expensive. Let me know what you think guys, and if you have any questions about finding out what your LT2 is, it's not that hard. Do an FTP test, work out what that tells you what your FTP is, circle back round, look on your Swift file, and it will tell you what your heart rate was at that time. Heart rate will rise gently, it's not like a sharp increase, so there is a little rough guide, and then from that you can kind of, once you're outdoors and cycling, use that as a metric, kind of 3-4 beats, usually either side dependent on your age, and then use that as a good guide for your LT2, or what we sometimes refer to as our threshold pace.